Now we're looking at this polynomial, t to the third minus 9t. A says find the first derivative. To find the first derivative, we're going to use the power rule. The power rule says if I have some function, the derivative of that function, I'm going to write down. So this is x. Actually, we have t to the third. I'm just going to say x to the n since I said f of x. And the derivative is n times x to the n minus 1. We're also going to be using a rule that says if I have the constant times a function, the derivative is equal to the constant times the derivative of that function. Those are all the rules I'm going to be using to take the derivative of this particular function. Now I'm going to write y prime of t. Make sure you write it completely. I know that the answer sheet that I gave out, I just wrote numbers down. I don't want you to do that on their test. I want you to write the derivative of t is equal to, and then we have t, the derivative of t to the third is 3t squared minus the derivative of 9t, which is 9. And that's it. That's the derivative. We can factor out a 3, and we get t squared minus 3. Find the second derivative. I'm just going to go back to my first derivative. And I'm going to say the derivative of 3t to the second is equal to 3 times the power rule, 2 times t. The derivative of a constant is always 0. 9 is a constant, always 0. We have the second derivative is equal to 6t. And then it says find the time when the first derivative is 0. Okay, I have 3 times t squared minus 3 equals 0. That means I have 3 times, and I can actually still factor t squared minus 3 as t plus the square root of 3 times t minus the square root of 3. And we're saying that equals 0. Now I can find my zeros. I'm going to now solve for t for this equation. That means 3 is never going to equal 0, obviously. So I have two solutions. T equals plus or minus the square root of 3. That's called my 0. Now, where the first derivative equals 0, we will find what we call relative max or min of a function. That means at t equals plus or minus the square root of 3, whatever that value is, I will have either a minimum or a maximum. D says sketch the graph of y of t showing n behavior and labeling the zeros and any maximum or minimum. Okay. First thing I want to do is I want to find my zeros. I go back to the original function, y of t. Y of t is equal to t to the third minus 9t. Why do I go back there? Well, because that's the function I'm trying to graph. This is t, and this is y of t, where y of t is equal to this. How do I find my zeros? I make y equal to 0, I factor t cubed minus 9t. I get t times t squared minus 9, which is equal to t times t plus 3 times t minus 3, which means t equals 0, t equals minus 3, t equals positive 3. These are my zeros for my function. And if you remember, since all of them are to the power of 1, which is odd, they all cross x-axis. Also, one more thing I need is my end behavior. End behavior, I look at my original function, and it's t cubed. Again, odd, that means, and positive, odd and positive, which means that it goes up on the right and down on the left. And that's everything I need to know to graph this function. Let's begin. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my zeros. I have a 0 at 0. I have a 0 at 3. I'm going to make each two of these into 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. At 0, I have a 0. At negative 3, I have a 0. And at positive 3, I have a 0. Good. Now, using my end behaviors, I'm going to say I'm coming up from the left. I've got to cross through this graph. I don't know where my maximum is. What do? I look at my first derivative. And my first derivative says at plus or minus the square root of 3, I have either a max or a min. Here's an easy way to tell for this particular function. Not always, but for this particular function, we can tell it's a maximum. Why is it a maximum? Because I'm coming up from the left. I'm going to go through that point, negative 3, because of my end behaviors. I'm going to go up to some point, and then I've got to come back down and go through 0. Once I go through 0, I'm also going to pass through the x-axis. That's going to be my minimum value. And then I'm going to come back up. I'll show you after that. But I do know that at plus or minus the square root of 3, I have a max or a min. That means I need to plot that point. I'm going to say here's negative the square root of 3. Square root of 3 is about 1.7. And let's plug in to our function because we need to find out what that value is. Y of t, y of negative the square root of 3 is equal to negative the square root of 3 to the third power minus 9 times the square root of 3. And the square root, negative the square root of 3 would make this a positive value. This then becomes negative because I have a negative times a negative times a negative. The square root of 3 to the third power, the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. So this would be 3 times the square root of 3 plus 9 times the square root of 3. This equals 6 times the square root of 3. I have my maximum value at negative the square root of 3, comma, 6 times the square root of 3. This is my relative maximum. Here's 6. Here's 7. And 6 times the square root of 3. 6 times 1.7 is 10.2. 6 times the square root of 3 is a little more than 10. 10.2. That means right around here is going to be my maximum value. Let's change the slope of that line and say we're going to come down like this. And then we're going to come down like this. Now, I also need to find my relative min. I know it's at 1.7. I don't know what it is when I plug in a positive there. Let's see what happens. I have y times the square root of 3 equals the square root of 3 to the third power minus 9 times the square root of 3. This again becomes 3 times the square root of 3 minus 9 times the square root of 3, which equals negative 6 times the square root of 3, again, approximately negative 10.2. Which is off the chart. So let's just pretend it's right here. And I'm going to come down here. I'm going to get to the bottom. I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back up through 0. And there, as we can see, I have my n behaviors. And it says to label the zeros and any maximum or minimum. Let's do that. Zeros. I have one here at negative 3, 0. I have another one here at 0, 0. And I have another 0 here at 3, 0. Those are all my zeros. And I found my zeros right here. Those are my zeros. Next, let's label our max and min. Here's my maximum. My maximum is going to be negative the square root of 3, comma, 6 times the square root of 3. My relative minimum is positive the square root of 3, comma, negative 6 times the square root of 3. I sketched the graph. I showed the n behavior down, up. That's really it. I think that would have been enough, n behavior. Sketch the graph showing the n behavior, did it. Labeling the zeros, did it. And maximum min, did it.